Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Scope here on British Muslim TV with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this episode, as we promised, we are going to be discussing the Lebanese elections and the results that have come out so far and try to understand exactly what the consequences for the country may be. Of course, we are being broadcast live on satellite as well as, of course, throughout BMTV's various social media accounts. If you have any questions or comments, even in the middle of the show, you can, of course, message us on the numbers that are indicated on your screen right now. As I said, the Lebanese elections, and of course, Lebanon, as we know, has been a country that's been in turmoil for a number of years now due to corruption as well as other related economic and political crises. Now, this Sunday's parliamentary elections and the results, according to certain media and according to others, may be different, and I will put this to my guests in just a moment, but they show a divided parliament to an extent which is likely to then exacerbate the country's crises unless the political actors can learn to work together and move beyond their differences. At the same time, then, of course, there is, according to others, an increase in independent anti-establishment voices, which have gained in numbers, and that may be, in fact, one of the lights at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, when it comes to these elections. Another huge aspect when it comes to Lebanese politics is external influence. And there's also always been spoken of in terms of Saudi Arabia versus Iran and their respective influences over different parties and opposing parties in that country. What do these elections show in that regard? Has any of those external players won out over the other? And is that a good thing for Lebanon altogether as far as independent policymaking in the country goes? So let's discuss those issues and others a bit further. We're joined by Karim Sharara, who is a political commentator as well as a PhD candidate at the University of Tehran. We're also joined by Dr. Abbas, who is a political expert. He has a PhD in international relations from the University of Leeds. He's also the author of the book Democracy in Lebanon. Abbas and Karim, assalamu alaikum to you both, and thank you both for joining us. Abbas, I'd like to start with you, and I know we were talking about this off air as well, but just in your opinion and your reaction, Abbas, to the results so far, what does this mean for Lebanon in your opinion?
Firstly, thank you for the invitation. I think the election is now not really promising for the Lebanese. What we have now is a divided Lebanese parliament. None of the Lebanese coalitions around the election actually was able to win the majority of the parliament seats. We have actually a parliament which is composed of several parliamentary blocks which have almost equal sizes, and in a country which is deeply divided along sectarian and political lines, that will make it very hard for the Lebanese political groups, to form a new government to tackle and to set or to develop the recovery plan to solve the financial and economic crisis that actually currently plaguing and the Lebanese. And also we have also in the next few months we have also the presidential elections, and I expect actually to have political clashes between the groups regarding who is going to be the next president. So actually, the results so far that are confirmed today, I think, almost confirmed. The elections actually are not really encouraging for the Lebanese. None of the coalitions, even March, April, or the civil society groups were able to dominate the parliament. And in a country that's really divided along sectarian lines, we are expecting a political clashes, political conflicts actually between the groups regarding important and divisive issues like recovery plan, the negotiations with the IMF, the demarcation of the Lebanese borders with Israel regarding the oil resources in the sea. All these issues will be very debatable in the next few months. So far, I think the elections actually didn't yield a new political coalition that's really able to move forward in developing the recovery plan for tackle the financial
All right, so if I can come in, Abbas, I wanted to bring Karim into the conversation too. Karim, what are your thoughts about that? Because there are two arguments happening online, at least when it comes to these elections. One is very positive, where people are saying Hezbollah has lost, for lack of better words, and then on the other side, there's talk about the fact that, oh my God, pretty much we just have the same status quo in the country, and that things will not get better from here on in.
Well, there have been a lot of changes during these elections. Well, first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. It's not easy to say that Hezbollah has lost, because you're talking about the fact that there is a sizable portion of the Lebanese population that has in fact increased its vote for Hezbollah and its allies. If anything, you have a higher turnout, a higher voter turnout in the districts where Hezbollah and its allies are present. And you also have a higher number of people voting for these lists. First of all. Second of all, this election was more than anything not just based on an anti-Hezbollah platform. There's been lots of talk about this. You can we can discuss what David Schenker, the former assistant secretary of state for Near Eastern Affairs, he recently spoke at the Washington Institute and said that the main battle is going to be on the Christian votes. Basically, this is what he and a few other pundits have been saying. Of course, he did say that there's not going to be much change, and this is for a number of reasons. First and foremost being that it's going to be difficult to institute any change in Lebanon because of the corruption. Second of all, because of the supposed opposition and their fragmentation. That's not to say that there won't be any change, because we can go into this. We can go into this later. But Hezbollah losing, this is false. But Hezbollah did not. Hezbollah and its allies, the resistance and its allies, did not win a majority, and that would be true.
Okay, so let's talk then about the system, if we can, Abbas. Do you think that it is, in fact, the governing system which is the problem to begin with? Because there's been that argument made many times over these years that it's this entire structure of government and governance in Iran, in Lebanon, pardon me, that is the problem altogether. The sectarian makeup, the divisions of the specific positions and the political positions in the country. What do you make of that, Abbas?
Of course, there is a problem in the political system, in the Lebanese constitution, the division along sectarian lines, and that makes reaching power sharing agreements between the groups is really very hard in Lebanon, and usually we reach compromises not usually.
Abbas, if I could just ask you to speak a bit louder, we can't hear you clearly.
Yeah. Of course, there is a problem in the political system because it's divided along sectarian lines. And we usually in Lebanon we reach compromises, not reaching solutions. Compromises between the sectarian groups and the political groups that are representing these groups. Actually, for instance, one of the issues that are now we most likely face in the next few months is that the formation of the government usually takes several months and probably 1 year or more, because there's no time limits to form the government, and the Sunni community, for instance, rejects to impose a time limit on the prime minister to form the government, because that will undermine. That's actually in their view will undermine the interest of the community in the political system. Also in the election of the president, also in the division of the ministers between the same groups and the political groups, usually face major problems, and that's usually delay the formation of the government for several months because of the conflict between the groups on how to divide the ministries between them and along sectarian lines, of course. So I think there is a major issue in major problems for the political system suffers from major problems that needs that should be solved to be able to move forward in the country. Otherwise, I think we will have a recurring political problems, political conflicts, and that's what's happening since 2005. And that actually shows how weak is the political system, and at the same time how it is strong, because the civilian groups really support the system, although it's suffering from several deep weaknesses and problems. So there's a
Right.
constitutional issue. The constitution should be amended to tackle these issues, to move to have a more effective and efficient political system that's able to meet the interests of the Lebanese and to improve their political, economic, and social conditions.
Okay.
The type agreement actually.
All right. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I take your point, Abbas. Karim, on that point of the entire governing system itself. Now, obviously, no one. I mean, yes, there have been people who have called for an entire change of the entire governing system. I've heard that said by a number of Lebanese experts over the years, but I would imagine that is impractical. Nevertheless, do you think that it is the governing structure which is the problem?
Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, needless to say, I mean, there are many people, mainly those that have profited from the post-Civil War status quo. They've been the ones reaping the results for the past 30 years. Many people, and in fact, many of the patriotic parties, shall we say, they're not comfortable with the status quo. They do want change, but it's near impossible to institute change in a country that's so strongly divided, and at the same time ruled by, shall we say, well, I don't want to use the term mafias, but there are a number of very strong political actors that are working hard to make sure that no meaningful change takes place. That's not to say that the problem is only domestic, because you also have foreign actors, namely the US and Saudi Arabia. I mean, you just have to look at the return of the Saudi ambassador just before the elections, and when he invited many of these people that are pro-Saudi Arabia.
Okay, I'm going to just cut you off, Karim. I do apologize. We're going into a break, but I will be right back with both of you right after this break. I do apologize cutting off. The viewers, stay with us. Of course, we're going to continue talking about the Lebanese elections. I'll be back with Karim right after that. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone, to The Scope here on BMTV. We're continuing to discuss the Lebanese elections with Karim Sharara and Abbas Assi. Karim, right before going to the break, Abbas was talking about, and I will not mince my words as Karim was, he mentioned the word mafia. And Abbas, I wonder what your thoughts are about that, because, you know, that is a word that I've heard used a lot, in fact, when it comes to Lebanese politics and the way a lot of politicians act in the country. Is that almost the root cause of many of the country's problems, especially when it comes to corruption, for example?
There's a group of politicians that actually have an intersection of interests that bring them together. And that's because of the interest in the division of the state revenues, for instance, in the state positions. That's bring them together from all sectarian groups. There's not actually mafia. I don't know if it's really an exit provides an exit definition of these groups, but those politicians actually have an interest in protecting the existing political system, because that's actually because they build their own wealth and political influence within this system, and they were able to benefit from the sectarian divisions of the state institutions, state revenues, and they were able to manipulate these privileges that they use are actually having from participating in the parliament, in the government, to manipulate these interests, manipulate the state revenues and positions for their own interests. So there is an intersection of interests between those political figures, political groups, and political parties. And that's what actually brings them together. So it's economic, political objectives that bring them together. I'm not sure if actually the word mafia is really an exact, this provides an
Yeah.
exact definition of the existing ruling class in Lebanon, especially the
Okay.
ruling
No,
class that.
and I take your point, of course. I mean, I understand that it is, of course, it's at some level political rhetoric. But Karim, I wanted to get to the main point of what I wanted to discuss in this show, and that is always, Karim, that Lebanese politics, whenever you speak about it, it's always termed as Saudi versus Iran. Is that fair in your opinion? And if that is fair, then that, I mean, what does that then mean for the country as far as its independent policy making goes?
Look, I wouldn't say that's exactly fair. I would understand that when you talk about uh, realist politics, you're going to have to talk about regional actors and how they want to influence countries around them, to influence the neighborhood, and that naturally this Iran as a regional actor would want to influence Lebanon. Why I think that this isn't fair is because the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are blatantly operating in Lebanon. I mean, this isn't exactly hidden. Just like I was saying before the break, when you look at the role the Saudi ambassador is playing and the role that the U.S. ambassador is playing in Lebanon, and how they direct their influence in the country, and how they talk and how they discuss and how or how they relegate roles to Lebanese parties. And this has been apparent in the WikiLeaks, that you can see what David Schenker is saying. You can look at the fact that Saudi Arabia has paid close to $10 billion, and the U.S. over, I think, $20 billion over the past 10 years in order to battle or to oppose the resistance. You can
Karim, if I may come in here though, if just for the sake of argument, Karim, the other side, you well know the other side's argument. The other side would say Hezbollah, and that Hezbollah is, in many people's eyes, essentially a proxy of Iran. How would you respond to that?
Okay, I mean, I would of course also understand this point of view, but this would also be incorrect, because if you want to say that Hezbollah is a proxy, you would have to see this on the actual level in Lebanese politics. When you say proxy, you're saying basically that Hezbollah is operating in the interest of Iran, but you're not exactly talking about a proxy relationship here. If anything, the Shiite component in Lebanon and the Shiite component in Iran, first of all, they share a lot of cultural relations. Second of all, the amount of influence that a resistance leader that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has, even in a country such as Iran, is unfathomable. Because I mean, when you look at the fact that former Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is speaking with the Iranian parliament and trying to get to the opposition on his favor, and quoting, I mean, saying, using Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah as a character witness. I mean, you don't exactly see Trump using Mohammed bin Salman as a character witness and saying, well, if you want to see how good I am, you can just go ask Mohammed bin Salman. Or you don't see Saad Hariri, the leader of the Future Movement, or any of the Sunni components in Lebanon being used as character witnesses by Mohammed bin Salman. You're talking about an organic relationship between these two peoples. Why? Because they share a common destiny, and this is only natural. So Hezbollah, this is why Hezbollah is not a proxy. They do share interests. They do share an organic relationship, but Hezbollah is the main decision maker in Lebanon, and this is also apparent.
Okay. Let me bring in Abbas on that. Abbas, I want to ask you very directly about Iran versus Saudi. What are your thoughts about that, the way that narrative is within Lebanese politics?
You may, I'm not sure if I hear you very well, actually. Did you,
sure. But if you can hear me now, Abbas, I'm basically asking about the external influence on Lebanese politics from both Iran and Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts on that?
If you look at the recent elections, you will see that the Saudi ambassador had an evident influence and intervention in the Lebanese elections. The Saudi Saudi ambassador in Lebanon, Walid Bukhari, actually visited many electoral districts in Lebanon and trying in an attempt to actually to weave alliances and coalitions and electoral alliances between the allies of Saudi Arabia and Lebanon in an attempt actually to be able to win the elections and win the majority of the parliamentary seats. And that was actually evident. Even using Twitter, the Bukhari was actually tweeting about the Lebanese elections. And this actually didn't happen with the Iranian ambassador in Lebanon. And even the Iranian politicians actually didn't talk about Lebanese elections, while Saudi Arabia actually was really intervening via its ambassador in Lebanon in an attempt actually to urge, for instance, the Sunnis to participate in the elections and reject the Saad Hariri call to boycott the elections. Also, there was actually some rumors about the embassy of Saudi Arabia financing some parliamentary candidates, funding them and funding their campaigns to be able to win the elections. So I think if you look at the case of the elections, actually you can see that the Iranian direct intervention in Lebanon wasn't really evident, while the Saudi Arabia intervention in Lebanon was really very evident. I think also if you look at the position of the Lebanese politicians, for instance, because they considered the Saudi ambassador in Lebanon as part of the Lebanese, and just that was actually a justification of the intervention with the Saudi ambassador in the Lebanese politics. So I think the Saudi Arabia was really attempting to change the balance of power in the parliament by intervening in the Lebanese elections. Yeah.
Okay. Just very quickly, if you can, Abbas, before I go to Karim, because this question just came to my mind. Do you think that Iran even needs to get involved? Because as I put to Karim, just the existence of Hezbollah in many people's eyes would mean that the Iranian component already is there.
I think Iran is more interested in the persistence of the resistance, the armed wing of Hezbollah. I think they don't care a lot about the composition of the Lebanese parliament or the government, as long as the resistance is protected in Lebanon. And that's why actually explains why they don't usually interfere directly in the Lebanese elections or in the Lebanese politics. Also, there is a very robust alliance between Hezbollah and Iran, which is actually not a proxy relationship. Hezbollah, I don't think Hezbollah received direct orders from Iran. Hezbollah is really independent to a large extent in taking and formulating its own political positions regarding even domestic and regional issues. Sometimes Hezbollah provide advices to the Iranian leadership about regional issues.
All right, Karim, I'm going to give you probably the final word, but I wanted to ask you, Karim, about the role of France, right? Because France got very heavily involved after the Beirut port explosion. We had Macron coming to the country. Even now, if you watch French media, their wall-to-wall coverage of the Lebanese elections and their results in both French and English media in France. What is the role of France? Has it been helpful as a former colonial power throughout these crises?
I think that France was trying to play a role, especially with the shift that's been going on between the Trump and the Biden administration, but it wasn't eventually allowed to play the role on the one hand. And on the other, it wasn't successful in playing a meaningful role because, as I said, a lot of people in Lebanon are, first of all, they refuse to institute any meaningful change. And second of all, look, as we said, there's a lot of corruption in Lebanon. And if you want to institute change, and this is what France was to an extent trying to do, but on its own terms. Within its interests. Like, for example, take the governor of the Bank of Lebanon, Riyad Salemi, who's been implicated in corruption charges in a number of countries, including France, Switzerland, I think two other countries as well in Europe. The French would have liked to have Salami removed because he's become too much of a burden. But the Americans, on the other hand, are still protecting him on the one hand and on the other as well. Salami has been able to implicate many of the prominent Lebanese leaders in his corruption, which is why he's been able to persist for so long. So if I want to conclude things, I would just say that France was trying to play a role, but was not successful in doing so because the Americans did not want change that France was looking for, and did not want France interfering in the Lebanon.
Karim, I do apologize. I'm gonna have to cut you off again, but we really appreciate that concluding comment. We appreciate both yourself and Abbas for your time today, and viewers, of course, we appreciate you for watching as well and for giving us your time. We'll be back next week with another hot international topic. Do stay tuned for that as well. Bye bye.